In modern jurisprudence, there is a prevailing assumption that governmental immunity is a necessary procedural safeguard. The legal system operates on this premise that efficient administration requires protecting public officials and institutions from the friction of constant liability. Constitutional scholar Publius Costos presents a starkly different reality. Through a strict reading of foundational law, he argues this legal consensus is a structural illusion and that immunity itself is an undelegated fraud. The American system defines the Constitution exclusively as a charter of strictly delegated powers. Under this framework, the government possesses no inherent sovereignty and only exists as a fiduciary agent of the people. This creates a direct, undeniable logical contradiction. A government granted strictly limited conditional power by the people cannot lawfully conjure a mechanism to exempt itself from accountability to those same people. We are going to systematically map the legal architecture of the United States to trace the actual chain of authority. By examining the rules of delegation, we can see exactly why immunity doctrines lack any lawful constitutional foundation. Immunity functions as the precise mechanism that transforms constitutional law into administrative fiat, severing the required legal bond between citizen and state. Before a single statute was written, before any court convened, there was law. The rights to life, liberty, and property are pre-political endowments. They exist because humanity exists, not because a state created them. This diagram outlines the immutable hierarchy of law. At the apex sits natural law. Immediately beneath it are common law maxims. The third tier holds constitutions, instruments of restraint. At the lowest level sits statutory enactments and administrative regulations. Government exists for one precise reason: to combine the pre-existing individual right of self-defense into a regular collective organization capable of securing those rights. Because this collective force derives entirely from the individuals composing it, the government cannot logically possess authority superior to the people who delegated it. The hierarchy demands absolute conformity. Any lower-tier statute, regulation, or judicial doctrine that contradicts the higher tiers of natural law and constitutional delegation is entirely void. Government authority is inherently derivative. No public officer can claim an exemption from the law binding the sovereign people without completely destroying this foundational firewall. Delegated power in the American system operates conditionally. Public office conveys duty and obligation. There is no latent, inherent sovereignty vested in the government itself. The 10th Amendment codifies this strict limitation, establishing that any power not explicitly delegated to the government remains entirely reserved to the states or the people. This is Article 1, Section 6 of the Constitution, the singular exception granting a narrow immunity privilege for legislators. This proves the framers knew how to grant immunity, yet the rest of the document shows a stark absence of similar provisions for other officers. This triggers a controlling common law maxim governing interpretation: casus omissus pro omisso habendus est. A case omitted is to be held as intentionally excluded. Under a system of enumerated powers, omission acts as a strict prohibition. The total absence of constitutional language granting sweeping immunity is a legally binding refusal to grant it. Because the people deliberately withheld this power, any modern judge or executive attempting to assert sweeping immunity is committing a direct usurpation of undelegated authority. Modern courts consistently confuse two distinctly separate legal concepts: power and jurisdiction. Power is merely the physical capacity to compel obedience. Jurisdiction is the lawful authority to act. This diagram illustrates the distinction. On the left, power operates as an isolated, autonomous institutional exertion of force. On the right, true jurisdiction functions as a continuous, unbroken chain linking the written constitution directly down to an official act. Foundational precedents like Marbury v. Madison and Norton v. Shelby County set the strict boundary line for this chain of authority. The Supreme Court determined that an unconstitutional act is not law. It confers no rights, imposes no duties, and affords no legal protection to the officer performing it. The legal status for an act performed outside of lawful delegation is void ab initio, void from the very beginning. Internal administrative procedure, institutional custom, or decades of repetition cannot cure a source that lacks lawful jurisdiction. Because immunity was never delegated by the people, any institutional claim to it is void from its inception. The modern state enforces these protections using raw power, completely detached from lawful jurisdiction. Delegated authority relies entirely on answerability to its sovereign source. The moment accountability ends, lawful delegation ends with it. Watch the structural failure. When immunity is introduced, the continuous chain of jurisdiction snaps at the accountability link. The governmental node floats adrift, severed from its source. It forms a closed, self-referential loop called administrative supersession, replacing constitutional law with internal administrative procedure. This arrangement directly violates a core common law maxim, nemo judex in causa sua. No one may be judge in his own cause. Modern legal systems bypass this rule constantly. Internal judicial councils, prosecutorial shields, and agency deference doctrines all allow institutions to supervise their own limits and dismiss complaints against themselves. This closed-loop system marks the precise, invisible transition from a republic governed by constitutional law into a self-managing administrative supremacy. This is the Magna Carta, a foundational document of English common law designed strictly to limit the power of the sovereign. Historically, holding public office did not elevate an individual above accountability. It imposed greater fiduciary duty. Equality before the law operates as a rigid structural necessity of delegated authority. Because every ounce of public power is derivative, no servant can lawfully claim a legal status superior to the sovereign people. Modern immunity doctrines fracture this required equality. By shielding officials from ordinary liability, immunity creates a two-tiered legal system, introducing an asymmetrical ruling class completely unknown to the Constitution. Modern courts frequently defend these protections using pragmatic arguments. They claim that immunity is a necessary public policy to ensure administrative efficiency and institutional convenience. Under a strict constitutional framework, governmental authority arises solely through explicit delegation. Institutional convenience can never legally supersede the limitations set by the written text. Immunity inverts the core relationship of the republic. It grants the servant legal privileges and practical protections that the sovereign people do not possess. We are left with one unavoidable constitutional question: are we a government under law or a government above law? Restoring the constitutional order does not require destroying lawful government. It simply requires recognizing that any assertion of power insulated from accountability is an act of usurpation and void from the start. Without absolute accountability, the law permanently ceases to function as a fixed, equal rule. It devolves entirely into discretionary administrative fiat. Republican government survives only when authority remains strictly delegated and every public actor remains continuously, personally accountable to the sovereign people.